Welcome everyone to Isley Branch Library. I'm Kate Schneckloff. I'm a Library Service Associate here, and thank you for coming. This program is in collaboration with the Indian Center, and it's through the Lincoln City Library's Innovation Grants. And I would just like to very briefly thank our director, Ryan Weber, Jodine Glazman, my branch manager, Lisa Olavini, and I leave the floor to Athena.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Athena Porter. I'm the executive director at the Indian Center. I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo tribe and descendant of the Omaha and Muskogee Creek tribe. I want to, sorry for speaking in front of my elders, excuse me. That's just how we introduce ourselves. And I'll go ahead and let Racia take the floor and introduce herself and what she does at the Indian Center.
Hello, good evening. First off, I'm very honored to speak on this Native author. It's a very humbling experience for me. My name is Racia Gonzalez. I'm a proud enrolled member of the Santee Sioux Nation. I'm the Elders Coordinator at the Indian Center. On Tuesdays, I hold a second Elders Lunch. So there's an Elders Lunch on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm working on capturing individual interviews to identify elder expertise and opportunities. I'm responsible for creating a library of classes, teaching groups based on Indigenous knowledge and their wise wisdom. I coordinate with the youth leaders to create elder and youth meals, experiences, and events. Virginia Driving Hawk Sneve is a quota author of 27 books. Her books are Native American based. She has several honors and rewards for her books. She came to our elders lunch on Tuesday and spoke about herself and her book. We are very honored to have her. Like I said, I'm very honored to speak this evening. Growing up on the reservation, I never thought I'd be living in a city having a job title like I do today. You're a very inspiring woman.
Thank you.
And so thanks again to the Lincoln City Libraries and Katharina for allowing this to happen. Shirley and Virginia both came on Tuesday to the Indian Center to talk to our elders program, and so I'll let Virginia take the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. I like coming to Lincoln. I participated in many different events here and at the university, but also because my family is here too. I have daughter and granddaughter and a grandson in Omaha, so I always get to see them too, because that, as with most of us in our cultural family, is kind of the center of our lives and always very important. I was born and raised on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. I'm a Sikanju and Ponca on my great-grandmother's side. Her father married a Ponca woman, and so I'm related to some of you here too who are Poncas, I'm sure. That's how we go about that. I have been writing for over 50 years. It doesn't seem possible, but I have been. And I mainly have focused on being a children's author of children's books. And I really started out doing this with a purpose after Shirley started school and started reading. And I was curious about what she was reading. And she started reading the Little House books, Laura Ingalls Wilder books, which everybody, and she started asking questions if this was like it was where her father's parents had settled when because he was of Norwegian descent, and so his family did settle, not where Laura Ingalls Wilder did, but down along the Brookings, south of Brookings in the Lake Campbell area. So in order to find out what that was like, I read the books. And there were bare mentions of Native Americans in the books about how they had come to the house and would come in and would be kind of dirty and foul smelling, and they were very much afraid of the Indians, but they were a peaceful group that came to see them and actually to welcome them to that particular area. But I got to wondering how my kids would think about their Native American heritage. And as they grew up, we combined cultures. they called themselves Suwegians, and that kind of stuck. And so we had, I started writing as a result of seeing a contest sponsored by the Interracial Council of Minority Books for Children. It was sponsored by, in New York City, by publishers and editors and other authors and institutions who were concerned that ethnic people were not being portrayed accurately by anyone of their own race. This was on the sort of the heels of the blacks who were being concerned and more active about the way things were going for their people. So the contest was open to blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, Asians, and even women who write about themselves. And as a result of that, my first book was called Jimmy Yellowhawk, and it won in the Native American category. And I had written offers from several publishers to want to publish the book, but we went to the reception and the awarding ceremony in New York, my husband and I, and this young, good-looking couple came up to me, and they were from Holiday House in New York, and they came with a personal invitation to publish with them, and that meant more to me than a written invitation. And so when I got home, they sent me a contract and urged me to have an attorney look at it to make sure all was, and I knew nothing about publishing or anything, and the lawyer I had in our small town had to look up publishing and copyright law and all that kind of stuff too, because this had never ever happened in Flandreau, particularly a small town. So when my first book was published, it was quite exciting. I had a front page, big front page picture of me and my book, and telling about the reception that we went to in New York City. And I was pretty flattered to see that in the paper. And then Flandreau is a small town. Everybody knows each other and knows what's going on. So this woman came to my door, and just about everybody always came to my back door, so I thought, oh, this must be a salesman or somebody. So I went to the door, and she burst in and threw her arms around me. She said, I am so glad to know you. It's just so exciting to have a real author in our town. I just keep everything that's important in town in this little scrapbook I have. So anything that's happened to anybody of any importance, I have that in my book right next to stories of people who died. So that's another way to think of fame. So I always keep that in mind of things I'm going to get a big head about. So my first book, I don't know if we have a copy here or not. It's been out of print for a while, Jimmy Yellowhawk. And these books here, it's called the First American Series of different tribes across the United States, is going to be reprinted. It should be out now, I guess, and which pleases me very much. I tell a brief history of the tribe, and it's written for children, so it's fairly simplified. But at the end, I concluded with stories or brief introduction of contemporary Native Americans of that particular time. So they have been updated now by local tribal groups of that particular group, like the Sioux is the first one to come out, which is my tribe, of course. And then they had some elders from the Rosebud Reservation see how things had changed and what important relatives they had who'd gone on to do some good things from their tribe. So that pleases me that that's still important for people to read about. The first thing that was published after the Sioux was the Navajo, and I was just absolutely stunned when the tribe bought a copy of that book for every fifth grader in that particular year, which just is a rare thing for any author to have that many books sold at once. So that was a very exciting thing for me to do. So I did those tribal books things, and then there's a book you can see about Standing Bear, and that I was asked to do that. What was it, the centennial year or something? I can't remember.
150th
anniversary of the trial. And so again, this is a children's version of it, rather simplified, but as accurate as I could make it from the research I did and talking to people and having some Ponca relationships there made it even more important to me to get things right about Standing Bear, who was a very important person in this state and in this community. Oh, you've got some more. Yeah, well, thank you for bringing that out. This is about my family, completing the circle. I do a lot of research, and at that particular time, the University of Nebraska Press put out a call for a nonfiction book by a Native author, and there were some guidelines to do that, and I thought, well, I can do that. And so then I started having to do some research to substantiate the information I had in my own family about the women in my family, because the circle of the family is kept by the women, and it's incomplete unless we know their stories as well. So that's the title of that book, Completing the Circle. And so I was very pleased that they did publish it, and it's often used in women's history or literature conferences and that kind of thing. And I don't know if it ever needs to be updated or not. I'm still here, so maybe not. The other types of things that I do, as I said, are mostly children's books. And the latest one out is The Summer of the Bone Horses. And it's based on the experiences of my brother when he was a boy on the Rosebud Reservation. And that summer, our father was very ill, and he had to go to Rochester for surgery, and then a long recuperation period of that. So like all good grandparents do, they took care of us while we were alone. And my brother was 2 years younger than I, and he was very homesick and very lonesome for his parents. And so his grandfather, Edward, who's, my brother's name was also Edward, but Edward was Grandpa, and Eddie was Eddie, the little boy, so that they wouldn't get mixed up. And Grandma always used to call Edward, Edward. And then she'd go, hey, Eddie, in a little nicer way. And so the story is about the summer he spent with him and how lonesome he was and how unhappy. And he was with Grandma all day. Grandpa was working part-time out at a ranch and rode his horse back and forth at the ranch work. And so then he would leave Eddie. But when he came home, he took Eddie down to the little corral he had, and he showed Eddie how to take care of the horse, to rub it down and cool it off and haul water for it and to feed it. And then later he taught Eddie how to saddle the horse and how to mount it and to ride it. He'd never ridden a horse before, so this was a brand new experience for him. So, but he couldn't do that because Grandpa took the horse when he was gone, so he was home alone. And they had a dog called Fritz, and we actually had a dog called Fritz. And so he'd play fetch, throw a stick, and fetch would bring it back. Do it time and time till the dog got tired or not, then he'd have to quit. And so one day Grandpa came back and he said, I got some horses for you. And Eddie kind of looked around and didn't see any horses. Yeah, he said, they're in here. And he had this little bag, and he opened it up, and there were some little bones in there. He said, these are cow toe bones, but my grandpa had toe bones from the buffalo bones, and they played with them, just like made horses out of them. So that's how they came to be bone horses. And if you get a copy of the book, there's a picture of the bone horses, the real ones that my brother had in the back of the thing. And he made little strings for halters and hooked them up to wagons and dressed him up and had a good time. He had something to do playing with his horses. And so this story is about that. And then Grandpa was injured. He'd cut his arm helping with some fencing. So he had to have stitches. And then, well, it's still true on the reservation. The hospital is about 40 miles away. And by the time you get there and everything, you know, it'd be quite a trip. So they had an old car, but it wouldn't start. So what Eddie did then was get on the horse and ride it up to the general store that was in the little town of Oak Creek. And he asked Mr. Smith if he could go take Grandpa to the hospital. Mr. Smith was a kind man. He did help out the Indians quite a bit in ways like that. So he went and took his car, and while he was gone, he had Eddie sit on the front porch to make sure that people would know that he would be back, and to be there to make sure the door was open when the mailman came. So Eddie did that. And then Grandpa went to the hospital. He came home with stitches and a big bandage, and he couldn't work. So he was at home with Eddie that time, so he would take him fishing down on the little creek. And he taught Eddie how to make whistle out of a blade of grass. You put a blade of grass between your thumbs and blow like that. And they called doves, and he had a really good time with Grandpa. But then it was time for them to go home. And he really hated to leave Grandpa. He was glad to see his parents, and he had such a good time, but it was time to go home. And so he had to say goodbye to Grandpa. But before he left, Grandma gave him a little box to put his bone horses in, and he took them home and said, "Grandpa, that's the best present I've ever had with those bone horses." And he kept them all of his life. And he's passed away now, but his daughter still has those bone horses. So that's become a very treasured thing in their family. So if you get a chance to read the book, that goes into more detail about how that happened. Then the latest book I have, and which is, I don't even know if you can get a copy yet, is called Special Places, Sacred Circles, and it's a memoir. I started cleaning out files, paper files and computer files, and I found stuff that I had either started writing or I did essay here or did something here and saved, because I never know when something might end up as wanting to be a book. But I started going through that, and I thought, well, gee whiz, maybe I should just put it all together in this book and see how that would be, so that my kids wouldn't have to mess with sorting through my stuff. And so I...
Thank you, Mom.
You're welcome. So this is, I'll read you a little bit about the introduction. "Stop, please, Dad," I urged. "I have to go pee." "Again?" Dad complained at the frequency of my need, which called for many stops and a run for a ditch. This was 1942, and travel during World War II was a hazardous adventure on old patch tires and gas rationing. The day was hot, and our old Chevy had a canvas water bag tied to the front of the radiator in case the engine overheated, and to use for drinking when we were thirsty. Nobody here is old enough to remember anything like that. No? Oh, okay. The car rattled and chugged out of the Rosebud Plains heading west. I saw silhouettes of dark hills rising to the mountains. We were going to the Black Hills. It was a special trip, a vacation combined with a church meeting Dad attended in Hot Springs. My father was an Episcopal priest. I had a stomachache anticipating the adventures ahead, and didn't know that Dad was paying that the few drops of gasoline left in the tank would get us to the next town and gas station. So I was doubly glad when the gas station appeared, and I hoped for the privacy of a privy and even running water, which we did not have at home. Well, the car was at the pump. I ran to the back of the station and saw 3 outhouses, men, women, and Indians. Women was locked, so I rushed into Indians, trying not to breathe the foul air as I perched on the bench over a reeking hole. There was a Sears catalog to wipe, but with no water to wash my hands. I hurried back to the car, and as we drove away, I thought about the 3 doors. That gas station had 3 toilets, I told my parents, one for men, one for women, and one for Indians. Mom and Dad looked at each other as I went on. Isn't that nice that there was a nice place, special place for Indians? No one said anything for a while. Then Dad replied, "My girl, I hope there will always be a special places for you." Years later, when I was aware of the bigotry and prejudice that existed outside of my secure family, I remembered Dad's word. I learned that I had to find my own special places because no one would provide them. So this is the story of the special places and persons I've had in my life and sacred circles. My Native American ancestors were of Yankton, Santee, and Sikanju tribes when white men met them in what is now Minnesota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Women of these tribes cohabited with or married white men, mostly fur traders, so that I am Ieska, mixed blood, which means my family were and are acculturated, taking what is positive from white society and adapting it to Indian ways. I wrote of this in my book, Completing the Circle. So there's more of that. Then I go on to how about the ancestors that had being so much a part of my life. And I start out when we lived in a little community called Milks Camp on Ponca Creek, which is almost into Nebraska, just above the Keapaha River. And my dad was a deacon at the time, and he had that small little church there, and was out on the open prairie. And some people might think it was kind of a desolate place, but it wasn't for us. We enjoyed living there and being free to run all over the prairie at that time. And what I remember one time was that a man from the congregation came up to my father in his rickety old car, and he said, I need you to come. I need to show you this grave or this burial. So my dad got us, the rest of the family, all drove down to this area towards the creek. And as I got out of the car, there was this kind of a tree thing with some sticks or branches over it and kind of collapsed, and there were tattered strips laying down below it. And below there were some bones on the ground. This was a traditional scaffold burying that the Lakota used to do when they were nomadic on the plains. They didn't have cemeteries. So they would leave the body exposed, usually wrapped in a buffalo raid, on the scaffold with the persons died, their personal effects and important items in their lives. Then later, they would come back after the decay and everything was over, and they would bury the bones. But for some reason, this hadn't been done. So my father and this man dug a hole and said a prayer and buried the bones. So that was something my father wanted us to see, to show us that Lakota customs of the past are no longer there, but we still must keep them in mind and revere them as well. Another thing I remember about being down there at Ponca Creek is that it was very, very hot day. And this is the Dakota Plains. It's windy and it's very dry usually. But all of a sudden it got just very still. And I felt the hairs on the back of my neck feel kind of tingly and funny. And I thought, what? So I got up to go to my mother. And then my father came and he said, come, we got to go down to the cellar. And he pointed down toward the creek, and we'd see this cone cloud come. There's a tornado coming along there. And so we went down into the cellar, and some of you might remember root cellars. It was a hole in the ground with a cave where you would store your vegetables and other things through the winter. And nothing ever froze down there, and it was always cold. But that's where we went for the tornado, because we didn't have a basement in our house. And we got in there, and my father had to hold the door down And my brother, Eddie, was very upset because the dog couldn't come along. And the dog's name was Soup, which is a kind of ironic name because the Lakota used to like to eat puppies at times. But Soup couldn't come, and Dad said, no, we can't get out of here now until it's all gone. So I don't remember how long it was. It seemed like forever, but there were spider webs, and it was creepy, crawly, dark, and damp. And it was really scary down there. And finally, we could hear the wind stop and got very still. Waited a little while, and my dad opened the door, and we stepped out, and it was raining. And my mother had had clothes on the lines and didn't have time to get them, so they were all gone. We never did find any of those. And so that was my experience of a tornado. And Soup made it just fine. Somehow she found her own shelter, and so we were all relieved to have her, because later on she saved my father's life. This was, we had a small house with 2 bedrooms, or 2 rooms, a kitchen, living area, and then the bedroom. And so we heated it with a wood stove. And so my dad, in the fall of the year, would go down to the creek and he would chop wood to bring it up to the house to let it dry so that we'd have wood for our stove. And the dog Soup went along with him. And all of a sudden the dog comes running back, barking at my mother, who comes out to see what's going on. And the dog barks at her and then runs down toward the creek, then comes back and barks at her some more, and does this several times until she realizes the dog wants her to follow him. So she puts us in bed and tells us to stay there. I remember that part. And then she follows the dog down to the creek where my dad had been chopping wood. And somehow or other the axe head had flown off and hit him in the head. He was knocked unconscious and bleeding, and somehow or other my mother managed to drag him up to the house and put him in the old car that we had and bundled him up, and then she threw us in the back seat, and we drove all the way back from Ponca Creek. I suppose it's maybe about 100 miles or so, to Oak Creek, where her parents lived. And then I vaguely remember my grandpa hauling me in the house and putting me to bed, and then he took my dad to the hospital. Then when he came home, we were just fascinated because they had to shave his head. And he had these stitches up there, and we had to look at him and poke at him. And we didn't realize how serious an injury it had been that he almost died from that. So that's the one memory. And then the other memory I have at Ponca Creek is the stars. Being outdoors at night, and it's this dome of the sky from one horizon to the horizon with all of these stars. And it just fascinated me. And then later, many years later, and my husband and I went on a cruise, and it was the same experience, standing on the back of the ship, watching this iridescent wake, and then all these stars above. It was almost a spiritual experience to realize how insignificant we were in the universe, and all of our woes and complaints and other things aren't worth that much. We think about it. So those are the things I remembered about Ponca Creek. Then I go on to tell about the other places we had lived, and until I came to the time where I stayed with my grandmothers. And Eddie was with the grandpas and had a better time than I did, because my grandma helped me, had me help her dry corn, and we had to scrape it off and spread it on these screens on the ground that were blocked up so air would fly through. And I'd have to sit there and fan off the bugs and then pick the little green bugs out of it. So I helped her do that. Then she also, how do I say this, she was given some beef, and we ate every part of the animal. Nothing was ever going to waste, which means the intestines and tripe, which is called tripe, and we had to clean that. That was the most disgusting thing I've ever done in my life. Very smelly and not fun, and I strip it all out and clean it until it was very clean. and then she would cook it with the corn. And it's similar. My husband used to like to eat, what is it called, menudo? Menudo, that kind of thing. He used to like to eat that. And he used to say, well, this isn't as what you think about lutefisk. It's not that bad. But because of my husband being Norwegian, we did have lutefisk. Every Christmas we had to have lutefisk. So that's why we're a bicultural family. We did those kinds of things most of the time. And then the story goes on about the different things I did in my life, and how lucky I was to be published in the first place, and then to have success with it over the years, and receiving the honors that I've had for my work, which is really a humbling experience, and I'm very grateful for all of that because I've had a great deal of success with my work. And I keep working at it. I keep moving things around up here, and eventually it might end up in a book. But I like to, people say, how do you keep going like that? Well, I said, I'm still working up here. The rest of me is wearing out, but it's still going up there. So I hope that will be the case of that. So, yeah. So anyway, that's the stories of that. And I don't know much else I can tell you about, but I don't want to bore you with reading, and I hate to be reading. I might read a little bit about how Grandma called Eddie in, and Grandpa. The old man and the boy smiled at the sound of their names. You're named after me, Grandpa said. It's a good thing she calls me Edward, or be answering the wrong call all the time. Let's wash up. He pumped water over the boy's hand, and then Eddie pumped water for him. Eddie and Grandpa sat at a small round table in the kitchen. Grandma filled bowls from the pan on her kerosene stove and placed them on the table. Grandma sat down and bowed her head, folded her hands, and Grandpa and Eddie did the same. She prayed a thank you for the meal. Then she passed a bowl of mashed potatoes, then gravy and corn. Grandpa helped the boy hold the big plate heaped with fried chicken. Eddie was hungry after pumping and hauling water. He gobbled up 2 drumsticks and mashed potatoes with gravy and corn. Dessert was Grandma's yummy apple pie. Thanks for the good meal, Harriet. Grandpa patted his stomach. We should have visitors more often. Eddie knew that Grandpa had made a special meal for his first day with them. After supper, they sat on the porch. Fritz snuggled next to Eddie. He nudged the boy's arm for a pat. They watched the sun set in gold and orange rays over the prairie. It was a warm evening, and Eddie liked watching the stars come out as the sun set. He felt a sting on his arm and swatted at buzzing and biting mosquitoes. Grandma led the way into the house. It was getting dark in the small living room, so Grandpa took the glass off the oil lamp and lit it so there was a soft, warm glow in the room. Grandma and Grandpa had no electricity in their house, nor was there running water. Grandpa took out his fiddle and played a happy tune. Grandma tapped her foot and sang, "You Are My Sunshine." Eddie nodded along to the music. He didn't know the words. By the end of the summer, he would. Grandpa played a slower song and sang with Grandma, "Good night, ladies," and then "Good night, Eddie." Grandma tucked him into bed in the living room. "I hope you sleep well. I'm sorry we don't have a bed from you, but we turned your mom's bedroom into a closet when she moved." "I'm okay," he said. "The sofa is soft." He closed his eyes as she kissed him. He wished it were Mom and felt that burning ache when he missed her. Tears came, but he was soon asleep. "Can you help me pull weeds in the garden?" Grandma asked, because Eddie was sitting there bored. "Edward has to go to work today." Eddie looked at Grandpa. "I didn't know you worked." His grandparents laughed. "Work all the time, but I get paid work helping Joe ride on his ranch 2 days a week. I ride Buck to herd cattle. Kind of like when I was young, but of course I had a friskier horse." "Buck is all the horse you need now," Grandpa said. So he grabbed his hat and, "Come help me saddle him," he said to Eddie. On the way to the barn, he handed Eddie a sugar cube and whispered, I got it as a treat for Buck, but don't tell Grandma. She thinks a waste of sugar. Carefully lifted his hand to the big horse. Buck gently lapped up the cube with his wet, rough tongue, which tickled Eddie's hand. That's good, Grandpa said. Now Buck knows you like him and he'll let you ride him. Me? Eddie asked. I don't know how to ride a horse. I'll always ride with you. You're tall enough now to fit the stirrups. You'll have time to learn by their folks come back. You will be able to do this. Then he saddled his horse and went off and said, I'll see you this afternoon. Eddie followed Grandpa to the corral and pumped the water while Grandpa unsaddled Buck and wiped him down with an old sack. Why do you have to wipe him like that? Eddie wanted to know. Horses sweat like people do when it's so hot. I wipe off the sweat and dust from the ride home. I want to keep him feeling and looking good. Give him the apple peels before he gets his real treat. Buck nickered as Eddie walked to the corral and poured apple peels in Buck's feed box. The horse quickly ate them. Grandpa took a sugar lump out of his pocket and gave it to Eddie, who then gave it to Buck. Grandpa put hay in the stall while Eddie filled the water bucket again for horse. After Buck was cared for, Grandpa took a small bag from the saddle and handed it to the boy. Brought you some bone horses to play with. Eddie looked and saw some large, odd-shaped bones. Horses? Yep, these are bone horses like my grandpa played with before he lived on the reservation. His were made from buffalo toes, but these are from cows. After supper, Grandpa showed Eddie how to make string bridles and reins for the bone horses. With soft wire, Grandpa made little men. Some were Indians, and their horses had no saddles. Others were cowboys, and Grandpa helped tie strips of leather for chaps on their legs. She gave Eddie an old shoebox in which to keep the horses and their riders. The next day, Eddie sat under the oak tree. He made a stick corral for the bone horses. He named the Indians High Elk, Two-Hawk, and Standing Bear. The horses were Toe, Blue, Shaw, Red, and Buck, after Grandpa's horse. The cowboys were Tex, Mike, and Joe, and their horses were Nellie, Skip, and Snoopy. The Indians had a race, and High Elk won on Shaw. The cowboys had a rodeo, and Joe got bucked off Snoopy. Fritz dropped a stick on the horses. Eddie laughed and threw the stick, and the dog fetched it until he got too hot. Eddie didn't have that achy feeling when he played with the dog and his bone horses. Soon Grandpa and Buck came trotting into the yard, and Eddie followed them to the stable. Grandpa showed the boy how to take the saddle off Buck and let Eddie rub the horse with the old sack. Then he pumped water without grasping. What did you do today? Grandpa asked. Played fetch with Fritz. Thanks for the horses. I had fun with them. Saturday, Grandpa stayed home and helped Grandma do laundry. He moved a wooden tub from the storage shed out into the yard while Grandma heated water in the big oval copper boiler on the stove. They carried it out to the tub, dumped it, and then Grandpa piled in the dirty clothes. The laundry day here is a full day's work, Grandpa explained. Your mom hated it. I know you have a washer and dryer, but we don't have electricity here, so we do it by hand. Eddie watched Grandma take a bar of yellow soap, rub it into the clothes, and run them through two rollers and then squeeze the water out. Then Grandma rinsed the clothes in a tub of cold water and sent them back through the rollers and pushed them down into the basket. Grandpa carried the wet, heavy clothes to the lines at the back of the house. Eddie handed the items to Grandma, who pinned them on the line to dry in the wind and the sun. Then she went into the house to make lunch. Eddie moved out of the way as Grandpa emptied the tubs onto the ground and helped them push them back to the shed. Grandma made hamburgers for lunch, and she served her homemade pickles. They were all hungry, and they quickly finished. After helping with the dishes, Eddie was glad to join Grandpa in the shade and have a nap. Late that afternoon, when the clothes were dry, Grandma and Eddie took them down from the line, and Grandpa carried the basket into the house. Eddie folded towels like he helped Grandpa do at home. You sure are strong, Grandma, he said to her as she ironed the shirts and dresses with a heavy triangle-shaped iron that she heated on the stove. But Eddie couldn't help with that, but he watched her. She laughed. Ironing is how I got my muscles. After that evening after supper, it was time for people to get clean. Grandma placed an oval metal tub in the kitchen and filled it with hot water, then cooled it with cold water. Eddie was the first to bathe. Grandma helped him shampoo his hair, and he scrubbed the rest of his body. He dried himself with a fresh towel that he helped to fold, put on clean pajamas, and crawled between sweet-smelling sheets that had dried on the line. He felt clean, more so than after showering as he did at home, and drying with a soft towel. He felt the achy pang when he thought of home, but after a long day, he quickly fell asleep. That's how I used to bathe. Didn't have any running water until I got into high school. And then I went to St. Mary's boarding school where we had running water and electricity, so I really felt that was a special place as well. So, well, that's all I'm going to do for now, and I'll be glad to answer questions about anything. Have comments? Yes?
I talked to Virginia. She knows I taught her books, and one of them is her book, When Thunder Spoke, and the main character is a 15-year-old, I think, boy. And my students would ask me a little bit about you, and I told them a little bit I knew, and they said, forgive me, they said, well, she's an old lady, but she understands boys. And the way the boys, it wasn't like a woman was writing about a teenage boy. They found it believable.
Believable. That's good to
And
hear.
hearing you tonight, was it your brothers
Yes, that's my
that gave you that insight?
Oh, yeah, well, my brother and I had 2 sons of my own. So there you go. You get to know boys how they act and behave and so forth. So yeah,
Well,
yeah. That was one of my earlier books that came out, yeah. Anybody else?
You have a lot of stories to tell, don't you?
Well, I still have, yeah.
I bet you do.
I consider
And they're
myself a
interesting. I
storyteller.
like hearing them.
My grandmother's, my grandma Flora, where I stayed with her that summer, the driving ox had a really small little house, 1 room, and I had a little pallet on the floor where I slept. And it would be so terribly hot in the evenings that we'd sit outside, and she had a little fireplace pit where she would even cook because it would be so terribly hot. And we'd sit out there and put sage on it so that it would smoke up and mosquitoes would keep away. And she would tell me stories. And I always thought she made them up just for me. And so I was kind of disappointed, sort of, when I got to college, and I found some of those written in books as legends of the Lakota and Sioux and other Indian tribes. So she told stories, and she used her hands and her facial expressions, like she'd say, oh, hon, they went over there, and she'd go like that with her mouth to point where she was going. And so the act of listening to her storytelling made it easy for me to make up stories, which I did. And make up stories after I started school and would tell stories about different things. Fortunately, my parents did not say I was lying. I just made up these stories. And so it just came naturally then from the oral storytelling to becoming writing stories for people. And I hopefully try to instill within the characters, as I did in the boys there, and in the events and the places, so that they are livable beings, so that it's not, it's a made-up story, but I want it to be very lifelike. Yeah. Anyone else?
When you began your research for completing the circle, was your mother still living? And were you able to tell her about that?
My mother and my grandmother were still alive, and so I was able to contact them. And I had a great-grandmother, but she died just before I started that book. But I remember them telling, and my great-grandmother was the Ponca woman, but she had married this Lakota man who was from Minnesota area the Great War, Minnesota Uprising, they called it, where the Sioux Indians rose up against the settlers along the Minnesota River Valley, thinking that there weren't any soldiers around to go after them because that was during the Civil War. But unfortunately, right at that time, this troop had been mobilized to go south, but instead they came against the Indians. So then they were defeated and we were exiled from Minnesota into what became Dakota Territory. And first they were sent to Crow Creek, which was a very arid, dry country. You couldn't grow any crops there or anything. So they became very dependent on the government handouts and that kind of thing. And that's, my great-grandfather was born on the way to Crow Creek. Some of them were sent up down the Mississippi and up the Missouri River, where they were disembarked at about Yankton, and then they walked up to Crow Creek. And you have to look at a map to see how far that was. But my great-grandfather was born on that trip. So I heard about all of this from my great-grandmother. So again, when I got to college and I was a history major, I read about this from an entirely different point of view than how it was told that way. So that has my story. That's part of my research too, to be very lucky to have my grandmothers there to help with that. So. Anybody else? Yes.
When you were talking about those bone horses, it reminded me of a patch of clay my brother and I had in the backyard. I would make little animals and such out of that clay.
Sure.
Good memory.
Yeah. Easy to make your own toys when you have them. Yeah, good memories.
Sometimes those are a lot more fun toys than what you can buy.
Yeah. Well, you were able to use your imagination a little bit more too. That's important to learning how to think properly. So, last spring, yeah, I think it was, yeah, my niece Lori came up from Arizona where my brother had lived. This was his daughter. And she was reconnecting with family up north, she said. So she drove, visited relatives all the way up and came to see me, and which delighted me. And then that's how I found out that she has the bone horses, because I had given her a copy of this book. And she said, oh, I've got those. So she said, oh, I didn't know they were so valuable. I take better care of them now.
So tell them why he moved to Phoenix, or why he moved to Arizona.
My brother?
Yeah.
My brother, Edward Driving Hawk, was chairman of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. But he enlisted in the Air Force when he was 17. He got mad at the school or something or other, and he left. He and a friend of him decided they didn't want to stay in school. So they left, and my mother had to sign permission for him to join, but he did. And so then he ended up as a radar person who tracked airplanes and enemy and that kind of thing. So he also worked on the land in Korea, where they would have to take the radar equipment up to this hill where they would spot where the enemy was and that kind of thing. And so just as they were coming up the hill, here came the Chinese coming down at them. And so they had to run back down the hill, and he got hit in his leg. And it just was very hurtful. It just went right through the calf of his leg. And so then he ended up being in the hospital for I don't know how long while that recuperated. And then after that, he went back, came back to the reservation and lived there for a while. And then he decided to go to college, so he went to Southern State College, which is at Springfield, or it used to be. And he was there, and he was supposed to be getting his GI Bill, and it didn't come, and it didn't come. So they had a hard time making a living and staying there. So he went back to the Rosebud, and he decided to re-up. At least they would get fed, and he would get pay in the Air Force. So he had almost 30 years in the Air Force. and he ended up serving 2 times in Vietnam and was exposed to Agent Orange. So he had all kinds of terrible illnesses and that from that awful thing that they did there. And so he had quite an eventful life, and that's Too Strong to Be Broken, which you may have a copy here. It's also published by University of Nebraska Press. I decided that he led a life with so many things happening to him that was not usual for a boy from the Rosebud Reservation. He was in two wars. He became chairman of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. He was an entrepreneur. He operated some businesses, and then he was chairman of the tribe. And during that period, there was some tribal, I hate to say warfare, but politics on the reservation, and pretty gruff and bad. So he ended up with the Agent Orange. He was becoming more and more crippled, and he couldn't stand the cold anymore either. So that's when they decided to move to Arizona, where it was warmer, and he would be away from the tribal politics as well. So then he did that, and then he also ended up in prison because he was charged with a fraudulent use of some kind of funds in this bank. And he stoutly denied that he did anything wrong. And the judge told him, well, if you confess to doing this, you can go. But he said, I didn't do it. I'm not going to lie and say that I did it just to get out of prison. So he ended up serving about 1.5 years in prison. And for the rest of his life, after he got out, he became very frail because of the Agent Orange thing. And eventually, I used to go down and visit him about as often as I could and heard his stories. And so that's how that came to be, and how we've come up with the bone horses as well. Yeah.
So you just had the one brother and no sisters, or did you have sisters?
No sisters. I have a half brother. My mother remarried, and so he lives in California. He's an urban Indian. He really is. He knows nothing about reservation life.
About being an Indian.
No, he does.
He's so far away from the culture.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with Tommy Orange's work. He wrote about in Oakland, the Indians in Oakland, that kind of thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. My brother was not part of that community. Not at all, huh? In fact, my mother and stepdad did go over to the Indian Center there a couple of times because they would have elders gathering too, and they weren't comfortable there. So, yeah, so a different world.
I know your father passed away quite young. What do you think he would say to you now about your career and how you represented the histories that you have?
I think he'd be very proud of me, and that I did create these special places for myself by my writing. And I think my mother was very proud of the fact that I did that. And she took credit on her side of her family, because they always told stories. And they did have a relative who did write sort of a brief history of the family too. So, yeah. Well, nothing else. I appreciate your attentiveness, and I'll be glad to sign any books if anybody had any. Oh, you got that. Thank you.